I decided to make my presentation quite real from the beginning. So it was quite inclusive because I involved my entire family in the process. You'll see the background to the speech comes from my husband, who I now call my speechwriter. My slides comes from my eldest daughter. She's actually an occupational therapist. The outfit I'm wearing comes from my youngest daughter. And then we couldn't get it right inclusively because my two sons didn't want to contribute anything at all. So they just benefiting from the process. But it's an honor for me to stand before you today to discuss a topic that lies at the heart of the future of South Africa, achieving an inclusive economy. And I think you'll all agree with me when I say that South Africa is brimming with potential. Its people, its resources, its diversity, and its resilience. And yet we continue to be faced with deep-seated challenges, deeply entrenching inequality, unacceptably high unemployment rates, and persistent poverty. And so as we gather here today, I think we all want an answer to a very fundamental question. How do we convert this potential into prosperity? And how do we make this prosperity work for all South Africans and not only an elite minority? South Africa's post-democratic experience has been one of major overhaul in a number of areas, not all areas, as the previous speaker has alluded to. We have institutions, constitutional rights, a functional judicial system, and a society that is free to express themselves without fear of retribution. But on the matter of economic transformation and inclusion, we're not making the grade. So why is this happening? Before I get deeper into the crux of the topic
today, ladies
today,
and gentlemen. My apologies that I'm unable to attend to this engagement in person, but I trust that you are having
to the hearts of all South Africans.
Today's address highlights how infrastructure, budget allocations, public debt management, and the G20's inclusive economy priorities under South Africa's presidency can come together to foster inclusive growth in South Africa. Unfortunately, our country continues to be one of the most unequal in the world, and over the past decade, our deteriorating infrastructure, especially at the municipal level, electricity disruptions, crime, corruption, weak investments, and very poor education outcomes have created a toxic mix that have reduced our economy's growth potential. In this context, infrastructure is a key driver of economic growth and job creation. As part of the government's medium-term economic strategy under the GNU, we have allocated over R1 trillion to infrastructure.
So imagine if our economy could learn from this.
Focusing on
globally, most economies are not working for most of the people in the world.
And this investment,
although technology is advancing throughout the world, many people can't get out of poverty and death traps. People are more stressed out and unsure about the future. So while globalization and technology are succeeding in creating an interconnected society, more people are feeling isolated and excluded from the economy. And furthermore, capitalism, which is aimed at achieving economic growth, is only working for those who have money. Okay? So you can only generate wealth if you have wealth.
The first of these
in South Africa, most of the barriers to economic transformation and inclusive growth are not external, they are domestic. And it's been listed by many of the speakers here this morning.
We have new public-private
economic
partnership
policies that only support the values of the Constitution on paper, inefficiency in government operations, excessive red tape, administrative and political incompetence, fragmented policy implementation, and corruption. And all these, amongst others, continue to hold us back. So how can we make the analogy of the Springbok rugby team real for an inclusive economy in South Africa? If we look at the old age purpose of an economy as defined theoretically, it's supposed to organize society and ensure a flow of resources. In economics, we talk about the circular flow model, which is a model used to explain the flow of resources and funds amongst the role players of society. But what happens when a crucial resource or factor of production is excluded from either being used in this productive process or is excluded from participating in basic transactions in the economy? When this happens, it means that the economy is not living up to its purpose. And this is what's happening in South Africa. The official unemployment rate has consistently been increasing since 2012 and is at the highest since 1994. Food insecurity, defined as running out of money to buy food, is at least twice as high as what it was in 2016, with surveys reporting that 37% of households are affected. Hunger is rampant, and depressive symptoms have doubled. And currently, approximately 70% of adults live below the upper bound poverty line. Just like our national rugby team, we have the players, we have the grit, but yet many of our players will remain on the bench. And as a country, we won't lift the cup. But so what we need is an inclusive economy, one that is designed to ensure that all individuals and communities, especially those who have been previously marginalized or disadvantaged, have equal opportunities to participate in and benefit from economic growth. In an inclusive economy, we all need each other. You can't be an island of wealth in a sea of poverty. What made the Springboks special wasn't just the players. It was the culture of having a unified vision and a coach who turned his vision, or this vision, into success. So too, we need leadership that did what Dr. Rassie Erasmus did. Create a plan, build a team, and deliver. Dr. Erasmus called it like it was. No fluff, no spin, just straight talk and accountability. But in South Africa, governance, however, is plagued by buck passing, red tape, and corruption. Economic literature tells us that in order to achieve an inclusive economy, it requires that we reinvent the science of economics. Economics, as we know it now, needs to move beyond a solely growth-centered approach to one that is progressive and productively inclusive. But can we honestly apply this radical approach to South Africa? Let's face it, our economic growth rates are dismal. We had a 0.1% increase in the first quarter of 2025, previously we had 0.4 at the end of 2024, the fourth quarter of 2024. For the entire 2024, we had a increase of a mere 0.6%. So while many critics and economists will argue as to whether the bread is buttered or not, others will argue that there's no bread on the table in the first place. And I want to argue further that there is no bread on the table because not everybody is included in the productive process. Dr. Rassie Erasmus uses every player on his team, even when at times we would prefer he not use Mani Labok. In his book titled An Inclusive Economy, my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Arno van der Kerk, I'm sure some of you must have read the book already, talks about an inclusive economic indicator called the GPI, Genuine Progress Indicator. So where the commonly known economic indicator, GDP, focuses only on measuring output, the GPI adjusts GDP by accounting for factors like income distribution, environmental costs, and the value of unpaid work. This indicator provides a more comprehensive measure of economic well-being. So while GDP is a measure of current income, the GPI is a measure of how sustainable this income is. According to Dr. van der Kerk, genuine progress ensures inclusive development, which means improving the quality of human life while nurturing the capacity of our supporting ecosystems. The GPI highlights a very, very vital principle. The people are the real wealth of our nation. So how can we achieve this type of holistic and inclusive economic growth? Please allow me to then provide a few solutions and opportunities for achieving this. Firstly, and this latches on to what Mr. Mbeki mentioned earlier, he spoke about the Human Capital Index at large in the beginning of his presentation. We need to invest in human capital. And I'm sure most of you or many will say that we are doing this, but are we doing it realistically? Are we doing it responsibly? Are we doing it responsibly? Dr. Rassie didn't say to his team, I'll only pick those who are ready and able now. He said, "I'll prepare those who are willing to fight." And he nurtured and empowered the raw talent in his team. One of the most significant assets South Africa possesses is its talent. We have a relatively young population, and our young people are dynamic, energetic, resilient, and increasingly educated. But if we keep underinvesting in vocational training, and we don't ensure that educational output is aligned with market demand, then we're failing them. Although the generic mainstream degree programs is succeeding in putting bums on seats at higher education institutions, these generic programs are not necessarily placing these graduates in jobs. Recent reports are showing that employers are now replacing entry-level jobs with AI. Okay, so that means that graduate unemployment is actually increasing. So the problem is not that our young people are not educated or qualified. The problem is that they do not have the relevant or appropriate qualifications. And as an academic, that concerns me. We now find ourselves in an era where we cannot run away from AI or digitalization. So we need to incorporate these into our curricula at primary school level. But first, we need to ensure that the teachers who are training and studying at higher education institutions are appropriately skilled to teach the kids at school. And if the labor market is not able to absorb graduates, then we should rather be churning out graduates that are self-employable and that will eventually become employers. Here we all have a responsibility to drive vocational training and entrepreneurial skills development. I really don't think our youth know how much a millwright, an electrician, or a plumber can potentially earn. That notion that they have that vocational skills is inferior or are inferior skills needs to be challenged and changed, because it's those skills that will make them self-employable and employers in the economy. If we want skill development programs and educational policies that address market demand, then we also need training authorities that are effective and efficient. I was fortunate recently to be involved in a project where we did a skills audit for the Free State Province on behalf of PCETA. In our audit, we found that the province is experiencing a growing need for digital transformation expertise, which remains largely unaddressed. But participants in the audit also told us that there's a definite mismatch between the job skill requirements and the content taught in the curricula at higher education institutions. So there's no communication between higher education institutions and private and public employers. The CETAs, for example, also need to be transformed into centers of excellence and not centers of corruption and inefficiency. Human capital investment is very vital for greater inclusion of the poor in economic generating opportunities and thus in achieving inclusive and pro-poor growth. Secondly, the way we do business needs to change. This implies for SMMEs, private sector, government institutions, and civil society. What does an inclusive economy look like? In an inclusive economy, it consists of inclusive businesses, and these businesses aim to achieve commercial success. We still want that, but also to create a social impact by creating opportunities for economically disadvantaged. Real growth shouldn't just lie in increasing material output, but in the value generated through improving human relations and their connection with nature. Large companies like BMW, they're seeing that there's more value in selling one BMW 100 times than selling 100 BMWs. Furthermore, by adding business practices such as resource efficiency, waste reduction, and continual use of materials and products, there's money to be made by involving the poor in recycling, upcycling, and repair. One man's trash can actually be another man's treasure. Big businesses can involve smaller businesses and even the communities where they operate and include them in their value chain by being a source of waste to these communities. A rubbish dump which is something that is an eyesore in most communities, can actually become a source of investment or income. Small and medium enterprises are the lifeblood of any inclusive economy. Yet most businesses will tell you that setting up a business in South Africa is similar to navigating a maze blindfolded. The red tape is overwhelming. From registration to obtaining permits to accessing government grants or funding, the process is all too often marked by delays. In Australia, the registration of a company takes 24 to 48 hours, while this can take up to 16 weeks in Brazil and 3 months in China. In South Africa, it can take up to 21 days. So not too bad if we compare ourselves to our BRICS counterparts. But let me tell you, it's a harrowing 21 days. And here I speak from experience. My husband and I were involved in applying for government funding over nearly a 3-year period. Same funding, kept on having to resubmit and resubmit. Eventually received a positive outcome in March. It's August. We still haven't received anything. Now, how do you tell young people, start a business, there is funding? Because this will hold them back, and especially if it's your only source of income. If we are serious about economic inclusion, we must simplify the regulatory environment for SMMEs, particularly in townships. Carcinomics, a term aptly coined by G.G. Alcock, has taught us that the township economy is a resilient part of the informal economy, which consists of a tightly networked social community, an eclectic mix of business ideas which address the critical needs of society. There's potential here, and it's up to us to use it. And I'm so happy about Stats SA's proposal to finally develop this register for small businesses. I mean, how else can we support small businesses if we don't know what small businesses we have in this economy? So I think this register will go a long way ensuring that we know who's there, what they are doing, and what type of support they need. And also to see the gap in terms of what businesses need to be established in informal businesses. Informal economy, sorry. Infrastructure development, it needs to be faster and fairer. Even the greatest rugby team cannot win on a broken rugby field. And like rugby boots with no grip, poor infrastructure holds back progress and growth. Infrastructure is a wonderful enabler of economic inclusion, but only if it works. The Zondo Commission, which investigated state capture, estimated that at least 57 billion was tainted by state capture, with the majority of that coming from Transnet and Eskom. However, the total economic impact of state capture is estimated to be much higher than that. And this has severely impacted our transportation infrastructure and electricity generation. And these two are very vital inputs in the production process. It's unacceptable that basic infrastructure in rural areas is left unfinished, and this due to contractor fraud, corruption in tenders, or simply a lack of oversight. The construction and water tanker mafias in South Africa are real. They're real and they're dangerous. But do you hear government saying anything about them? No. We must professionalize procurement processes, and infrastructure rollouts should not only serve as political campaign boosters. South Africa does not have a money problem. We have a delivery problem and we have an accountability problem. Lastly, we need to embrace green and digital economies. The global economy is rapidly digitalizing and greening. These trends offer us fantastic opportunities to leapfrog old systems that are no longer working for us. But digitalization in South Africa is a buzzword, and we're still lagging behind with respect to this. In the majority of rural areas, a lack of internet, digital literacy, and basic infrastructure disconnects millions of individuals from these opportunities. But the green economy, which is also now growing, must not leave behind those communities which we find in South Africa who are still very dependent on traditional agriculture. Instead, we need to empower such communities to transition to be more renewable, and to innovate. An example of this is Ghana. One of my PhD students is doing an investigation on this. Ghana, for example, the state has implemented various social innovation initiatives. And this is to assist the 100 of farmers who are dependent on cocoa production. And they have found that there's a decline in the cocoa sector in Ghana. So what the state now has decided, let's be proactive. We have hundreds of farmers who are dependent on the sector. The sector is facing a decline. Let's help them. And so they realize that the cocoa farmers will perish if the cocoa sector collapses. And as such, they are implementing innovation initiatives to provide these farmers with sustainable income-generating opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, an inclusive economy is not a mystery. We have the plans, we have the talent, we have the team, we have the resources. All we lack is effective, ethical, and efficient implementation. To transform South Africa fundamentally, we must embrace a culture of inclusive growth that firstly is people-centered and not only money-driven, results-orientated and not only politically driven, transparent and not transactional. So the moment has arrived for us to move from the red tape to real results and to build a South Africa where growth is not only possible but inclusive, empowering and sustainable. Stronger together shouldn't just be a slogan. It's actually an economic model that we can build on. And so I think it's up to all of us to journey on this path of redemption and chase the sun like the Springboks do. Thank you.